Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. It's the season of the witch, and in this episode, we're conjuring up the spirits of Dario Argento's Suspiria. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back, witches.
Hey, witches!
Welcome to another enchanted episode of Reels on the Rocks with Whiskey and Sweet Tea. How are you doing, T?
Well, I was just about to say it was enchanting to meet you. No, I had to throw it in there. I'm sorry, I did.
We've known each other for a while. No, but man, it's been a while. Like, due to stuff going on in our personal lives, it's been like a month since we've recorded. But at least since the last time we recorded, yay, the writers' strike is over.
Yay, victory for writers! And I think just a few days ago, I think they officially voted on it and overwhelmingly approved it.
Yeah, I think it was yesterday, actually.
Yeah,
I think they it is about like a week or 2 weeks or something ago they ended it, but now it's like officially like they signed all the papers and everything.
It's been ratified.
The only concern they were talking about is enforcing the new policies, which we'll see as we go forward. But otherwise, looks like that saga is finally over. You guys can stop hearing us talk about it every episode.
But it was so much fun.
I got a fun topic for this episode.
Okay.
Not exactly new news, but maybe it was like a month ago. But there was a story out. We've talked about Rotten Tomatoes on this show. We've given our criticism and how it's a review aggregator. You shouldn't take it too seriously. All this stuff.
Right.
But and I did talk to you a little bit about this outside the show. I don't know if you heard about it. There was a bit of a scandal with some fake reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. Did you hear about this, T?
I think I did, but go ahead and spill the tea, Whiskey. I want to know.
All right, so I believe... Oh, I should have written down... it's been covered by a bunch of outlets, but I think it was like Collider or something that broke the story. But basically, so it turns out there's this PR firm called Bunker 15. And so they got caught.
It's already starting off, which is hilarious.
So Bunker 15 is this PR firm. For any of you guys who are just casually interested in movies, PR firms, all sorts of people hire them, politicians, celebrities, whatever, to get out good press for whatever you're doing. So movie studios will hire them for things like advertising, drum up some good press for a movie. So this PR firm Bunker 15 got caught paying critics on Rotten Tomatoes to give positive reviews to bump the score up.
Oh my god! And so people always talk about how they're like, oh, why? Because it's like, a movie will come out and it'll always, not always, but it'll have like glowing reviews and everybody sees it and is like, oh my god, this sucks. And they're always like, oh yeah, because those are all the paid reviews first. I guess we now have proof of that happening.
Well, I've always been someone to push back, because especially with like the superhero fans, especially like Snyderverse people, were like, they were trying to like take down Rotten Tomatoes because they thought that everyone was being unfair to DC. Thing about this is it's not big movies. This PR firm was representing like indie movies. The one that was highlighted in the story was a film starring Daisy Ridley called Ophelia. I think it's based on like an old play or something. Maybe it's Shakespeare. It sounds familiar. But anyway, it's like a period piece drama kind of thing. And Bunker 15 was hired to boost the percentage up for Ophelia. And because of that, let me see, which thing? I think it was Focus Features. My note-taking hasn't been good for this story. But I believe it was Focus Features was the one who distributed it. But the reason they picked it up was because they wouldn't pick it up unless it had X amount of, like a certain percentage on Rotten Tomatoes, which is crazy because another thing that was kind of covered in the story is how Rotten Tomatoes has kind of changed the landscape for films and what gets greenlit, what gets picked up for distribution, which Makes sense. I mean, we've talked about it in previous episodes when we talked about Rotten Tomatoes, but what a review aggregator is essentially, if you're a critic or if you're, just someone who likes to review stuff on Rotten Tomatoes as a moviegoer, you basically have a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There's no in between. It's not like our show where we give ratings based on 4 stars as a joke because of Siskel and Ebert. But so you only get good or bad, which is kind of problematic in and of itself. But so the percentage you see, whether it's the tomato meter or the popcorn meter, is just the percentage of people who liked the movie. And that's where, like, people who are talking about this story are kind of like Rotten Tomatoes is really, like, dumbed down, like, criticism as far as, like, you just take a look at Rotten Tomatoes and see what the percentage is. One thing I've talked about when we've talked about this is I do think, like, back in the old days, whether it was Siskel and Ebert or whether it was, like, your local movie critic with the newspaper, it was, like, one person's opinion. And whether it was like someone you followed because you liked them or it was the local critic, you kind of got an idea of what they like. Mm-hmm, and personally, I feel like that's more valuable. That, like, I do think Rotten Tomatoes is valuable at a glance to see what's, like, gotten more positive reviews. But I feel like it's kind of a shame that we've lost that sort of parasocial relationship with critics where it's like, oh, I hate this guy. All of his opinions are wrong, so he hates this movie, I'm probably gonna like it, or vice versa, where you, like, love a critic, they always side with your opinion, so anytime they say something, like, you go and see it. I don't think it's necessarily 100% better, but at least, like, when you're reading a review and they're talking about the pros and cons of a movie, I think that's a little bit more in depth than like, just
then just is it good or is it bad, or what's the percentage?
Exactly.
Like the percentage.
Well, and that's, I'm sure you've seen this when you're reading reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. I find it funny when it's like a red tomato, but when you're reading their review, it's just like listing off a whole bunch of things they didn't like.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's one of those things where, like, if there was like a star rating or something, it probably would be like a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. But because they can only say yes or no, it's like they really didn't think it was that great, but they give it a good, a thumbs up because why not? Like, it's not a terrible movie. So, like, and what it, all the people who hate Rotten Tomatoes because their favorite movies don't get good enough scores, like, this was not Rotten Tomatoes' fault. In fact, they have removed all of their Bunker 15 like movies off of Rotten Tomatoes, so I don't even think if you searched Ophelia you'd be able to find it anymore, because they just, like, went scorched earth. Anything that this PR firm,
like, anything they just touched was just out,
which is fair. Frankly, I feel like this should be probably like the last thing that they do, because that's pretty scummy. And here's the funniest part to me, like, how much do you think they paid critics for a positive review, T?
I'm guessing not a lot, or I must go with not a lot. I'm gonna go with not a lot.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't, which is funny to me, especially, like, it kind of shows whoever these and a lot of them were, like, low level, not to
how much is your integrity worth?
Apparently up to $50.
Up to $50?
And
that's it?
The up to is what makes me laugh, because that's apparently, like, the highest they paid people. So imagine, like, you're Mr. Movie Critic, you think you're, ooh, I'm gonna be big one day. I've got a Letterboxd, I've got a Rotten Tomatoes account, I review stuff on IMDb, and someone's like, oh, here's $10 to review this film positively. I just found that so funny. Like, it's not even that much money, and these people are basically kind of showing that they have no morals. Like, they just, oh yeah, sure, whatever you pay me, I'll say it's good.
That's so embarrassing. I mean, like, journalistic integrity is everything, and it's like, you couldn't even do that's like the baseline. You couldn't even do that.
But I've defended Rotten Tomatoes in the past with the Snyder people and stuff, and I gotta say, at least they got rid of like any reviews, like as I said, any of the Bunker 15 movies. From what the news things that I saw said, like they just removed them off of Rotten Tomatoes. Like you can't even find them anymore. So they care. And also, I didn't write down the quote, but a representative, like a spokesperson for Rotten Tomatoes, did have a statement, and it was pretty angry sounding.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I feel like Rotten Tomatoes is really good for like what we do when we talk about older movies, kind of getting an idea of what the consensus was at the time.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what it's good for.
Absolutely. I think the last time we talked about it was Paddington 2, because of the whole thing where Citizen Kane got bumped down to like 99% or something because of that one negative review. But there you go. It's like that doesn't make it any less of a good movie, like unless that percentage really means something to you. Like it's funny that technically Paddington 2 has more positive reviews than Citizen Kane, but it's like and that too, I think we talked about it in that review, how some people got really angry about that, and it's like it means nothing. It just means that they found a negative review that hadn't been aggregated to the site.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it's like and that too, I think in that episode, maybe it was a different episode, but I feel like we went on Rotten Tomatoes and we're looking at a bunch of famous movies, because I mentioned that I did that in high school. It was like fun to go on Rotten Tomatoes and look up things like Titanic or Gone with the Wind or The Wizard of Oz or Terminator 2, and just see what the percentage is, because none of them were 100% and some of them were a lot lower than you would expect them to be.
Right, and the fact that all those movies have staying power, basically, like what you've said, show that the system's basically meaningless. It's more interesting to kind of look at how something was received at its release, as opposed to weighing whether or not it's a film of quality.
Exactly. Like, I think if you're so lost in the sauce that you have a movie you're really looking forward to seeing, and then you go to Rotten Tomatoes and it's got like a 65%, and that makes you decide not to see the movie, I think you might need to unplug a little bit, because that's where I think it might be harmful to the ecosystem, so to speak. Yeah. Like if it's affecting your opinion to the point where like you're basing all of your decisions on whether something's fresh, I'd say reconsider that. Like whether it's our show or whether it's Chris Stuckman or Red Letter Media or Ryan Hollinger or like any of the other like movie critics out there on podcasts or YouTube or whatever. I'm a big fan of kind of building an understanding of a critic and what they like and what they don't like, and when you tend to kind of know their taste, I feel like that's a better sort of you get a better understanding of why they might not like it and whether or not you would agree with their opinion. And I feel like that might be better for people to get into, because Rotten Tomatoes is great. As I said, if you're like, I want to see a movie, what's out, and you flip to Rotten Tomatoes to see what's recently been reviewed and look at the percentages, and you decide based on that like what you feel like watching, I think that's fine. But I do like people who get it in their head that it's like the final say on whether a movie is good or not, I think is...
Listen, I had a traumatic experience with Rotten Tomatoes. I was a freshman, at BU, like we all were at one point, and I had just gotten a DVD copy of Down with Love, and I wanted to watch it, and I was trying to watch it with people, and this one girl was like, well, let me check what it says on Rotten Tomatoes. And I think at the time it was like 70 or something, and she decided not to watch it with me based on that. And I was like, seriously? What did that tell you about the movie? She didn't even look at individual reviews. She told me like, oh, the percentage is below what I would watch him. And I'm like, okay, you got problems.
Well, and I remember you told me that story during that review, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, the funniest part about that story is 70% is still fresh, so that doesn't even make sense. It's like, I mean, Rotten Tomatoes is saying it's a good movie. 70% isn't, like, super high, but, again, look at a bunch of famous, like, award-winning movies on Rotten Tomatoes. It's crazy some of the percentages they have. Like, I think on an episode that we recorded before, I think we looked up some stuff like Terminator 2, and it had like under 90%. And that's like crazy because you're thinking, oh my God, this is like a classic. It's a lot of people's favorite movie. All of a sudden, it's a review aggregator. There's tons of people who, there's even a famous, I can't remember his name. I remember his last name is White, but there's this guy who is infamous. He's a movie critic. I don't know who he writes for, but like the joke with him is he always has the wrong opinion. Like he loves the Transformers movies. He hates Marvel. Just every opinion he has goes against what most people think. And he's literally like what I said. Like if he doesn't like something, he's useful in the sense that you'll probably like it if you have normal taste. And
oh, great. We can watch this now. This person hated it. Oh, good. That means I'm going to like it.
Exactly. And there's probably people who agree with his opinion on movies and stuff, but like that to me, I think is more useful because then you can at least hear them explain their reasoning rather than looking at a percentage. And that's a great story from college that you have because that's what I'm talking about when I say like if you're so lost in the sauce that like a number on a review aggregator decides whether or not you want to check something out. I can understand if you don't know what you want to see at the theater on Saturday night or something, but like if someone is telling you that this movie is worth seeing and a 70% is like not high enough for you to go check it out, I think you might need to take a break. and now we have valid evidence that number is kind of BS because Bunker 15 got caught, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other PR firms doing the same thing. And even though big movies were not caught with this particular scandal, I would not be surprised if there are bigger PR firms hired by people like Disney or Warner Brothers that do pay bigger critics for reviews. Obviously, no evidence for that, but I mean, if it's happening in a small scale, I wouldn't be surprised if someone is doing it at a higher level. So, PSA to everyone
Disney's
who
paying,
listens to our
Disney
show.
is allegedly paying $51.
There you go. It's the big bucks. Warner Brothers is paying $100 for anyone who gives a good review to the new Exorcist movie.
Oh my God. All
4 out of 4, by the way.
alleged.
No.
For entertainment purposes only.
By the way, the new Exorcist is a 4 out of 4. Go see it. No, I'm kidding.
Oh my God. Don't mislead our people like that. They're going to go there thinking that's what the actual Exorcist series is like. Which, by the way...
it's $100, T. I want the money. I think of what you can buy for $100.
Listen, that won't even buy me a complete set of Fenty skincare, so it's not enough.
Yeah, so in conclusion, don't go to Rotten Tomatoes. Just wait until the end of the year for our finale to know what we think of all the new movies coming out. Shout out to December when that'll come out. Still working on my list.
Oh my God.
Plus, we're fun because we make it into a drinking contest, so you can play along.
And whiskey gets lost in the whiskey.
Yes.
You should start saying that instead of lost in the sauce. Say lost in the whiskey.
Lost in the sauce. But yeah, I thought that was a fun little tidbit. Again, it's like a month-long story. Came out weeks ago, but I thought it was funny enough to talk about on the show. And by the time this comes out, it'll probably be 2 months. Who knows?
But what the whole thing's interesting to me about this is that's always been that rumor that people have heard for years. Oh, the reviews are just paid for, but it was kind of just like one of those conspiracy theory things. And now we know that on some level it was true.
Exactly, and I wouldn't be surprised, at least I don't know if Rotten Tomatoes was the one who made the catch. It sounded like it was like a journalist discovered it. I'd have to reread the story, but someone is looking out for this stuff. So at least, hopefully if it is happening, it continues to get caught, because that is pretty pathetic. Again, like all of the people, I think they named a few of the quote unquote critics, and also they might have just been puppet accounts. Who knows? It might have just been, although they did say that they were paying people. But anyway, imagine just being so pathetic that you were willing to, for $50,
sell your integrity. $50. We'll sell out for $50.
Just amazing how rough you gotta have it. But Before we get into the meat of the episode, what are you having to drink tonight?
Okay,
Tea?
so I'm having something very specific, and you'll probably understand what it is when we get to talking about it. So,
Ooh.
because of the coloring of the movie, I got like a frozen daiquiri that's
Okay.
but I had it swirled with like red and like blue because those are like the two I think dominant colors really in the movie. Because
Oh
this
yeah.
movie is all about dominant colors, and I'm calling it the most casual murder, and I'll explain what that means later. So what about you?
You said you got it. Did you make it yourself or
No,
like?
there's this drive-through daiquiri place by my house.
Nice. Did they spike it for you?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's spiked. Daiquiris are spiked. Did you not know that? But I did have
No,
them
I
throw it
know
in.
that. I
I did have them at.
through. Well, that's
I had them add an extra shot of whiskey.
nice.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
we have
and that
we have
too.
drive-through
I'm
liquor
actually,
places.
It's funny. I know I've had a daiquiri at some point, but I don't even know. Is it just whiskey that's in it normally? I actually don't know.
Oh my god, I actually don't even know what's in it normally because I just go to this place all the time. Now I gotta look it up. What is the? It's not normally whiskey that's in there.
There's something very funny about it. There being a drive-through daiquiri place.
Look, you know what? This happened after the pandemic when all these like bars are having issues. So they like pass some law that lets like them have like drive-through like liquor and stuff like this. Like you can now take
I
home
just like
open bottles of wine from like Olive Garden and stuff.
I just like to imagine there's like cops just parked at the exit of the daiquiri place. Like as soon as someone makes a mistake, they just here, let's breathalyze you.
And I looked it up. It's rum.
Okay, Coolio. Oh, and that makes sense. I think daiquiri is like, well, I know it's like one of those things you drink in like tropical areas, so that makes sense. So I got kind of creative with mine. I did a cocktail. I can't remember how long it's been.
I'm
since
so
I did cocktails.
proud of you.
So what I did was color based as well. I probably could have left this off for a different kind of movie, but so because of how bloody the opening is, I was like, ooh, let's get something red. So what I did was I made myself a Shirley Temple spiked with Tito's vodka.
Actually sounds pretty. Isn't that a Dirty Shirley? Is that what that is?
I didn't even know if it was like a proper cocktail. I was just like, ooh, Shirley Temples are tasty. They're red. Just put some vodka in that and it probably works. So maybe there is a Dirty Shirley. I didn't know. I just looked up the recipe for a Shirley Temple because I wasn't sure if I was correct in my head. I was like, isn't it just Sprite and grenadine?
Sprite, yeah, it's Sprite, grenadine, and then you put one of those little swords in it that has like cherries on it.
Exactly. And I don't have any maraschino cherries on me, but that's the only thing it's missing. But yeah, could have saved this if we ever review a Shirley Temple movie in the future. I obviously, well, who knows? Maybe I'll just get lazy and make this again. But it makes sense with the red. So,
okay, wait.
Cheers.
What liquor? Oh, okay. Cheers. Ooh. Not bad. It's a little melty because I let it melt, but it's still tasty.
Same with mine.
Wait, what did you say? You put Tito's vodka in there?
Tito's vodka.
Congratulations, you made yourself a Dirty Shirley. That's the go-to liquor. Is
a real cocktail. Alrighty, so gonna get through the obvious fun fact stuff quickly, and then see what you thought.
Are we talking about? What are we talking about here?
We are talking about the horror classic Suspiria, which has been, from what you told me, on your list for a number of years, and I actually picked this partly because I thought you would like it so much. So this is the OG Suspiria. Came out August 12th, 1977. Potentially, maybe the remake we could talk about in a later episode. That one was actually directed by the guy who did Call Me by Your Name, which is funny because he does a lot of horror movies. So that movie's almost like an outlier because he did, I think it was called Bones and All, just like last year, which was like a romance about cannibals. And then he did the Suspiria remake right after Call Me by Your Name. But people were worried it was going to suck, before it came out. But it's fine. It does what I'm always saying on the show, remakes and reboots should do. Justify your existence. It is a remake, but it is completely different from this one. So Suspiria came out in 1977, same year as Star Wars, by the way, which is fun to know. The budget, for some reason, is not listed on IMDb, so I guess no one knows how much it cost. And worldwide, it grossed only a little bit more than the federal minimum wage worker would make in a year. It grossed worldwide $21,760.
What? That's it?
Yeah, right. It's like weird to me too, because this is kind of, I wouldn't, horror fans like this movie, but it's also kind of one of those like film nerd movies. So it's weird to me that it didn't at least break even. Yeah. I don't know how much, obviously the budget wasn't listed, but I was not expecting this to be one of those bombs that we talk about where it's like, oh, can you believe Hocus Pocus or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was a box office bomb? It's one of those, and I was not expecting it to be that, that kind of movie.
Yeah, I wasn't either. Wow.
Yeah. Dario Argento was the director. We'll get way more into him later on because he's a big thing.
Okay, I am going to help you out and to tell you it's pronounced Dario.
Dario Argento. And I should know that. And I also... Anyway, so Dario Argento was also a writer along with his girlfriend, Daria Nicolodi.
Wait. It was Dario and Daria?
Dario and Daria.
Oh my god.
And we'll get into that too. They have a daughter, Asia Argento, and she's not really, related to this movie, but she comes up a little bit later. And then uncredited, one of the writers was Thomas De Quincey. Cinematography was Luciano Tovoli. Production design was Giuseppe Bassan. Jessica Harper was Susie Banyan. And Helena Marcos was uncredited, but fun fact, she was played by a 90-year-old former prostitute that Dario met on the streets of Rome.
Was he a client of hers, or did he just meet her? I don't
know. He might have just been talking to random people on the street, but that's a fun fact. She's uncredited, but whatever her name was, she was a 90-year-old former hooker from Rome.
Wait, but what did she? So she did the voice and when the body does appear. So she was both of those.
I believe so.
Okay.
Again, it's uncredited, so it's hard to know. I even remember reading the credits. I just thought I missed them, but then when I was doing my research later, it's like Helena Marcos didn't come up, and then in the trivia stuff, that's where it said that it was a former. So I guess she did the voice. Just that character, Helena Marcos, is not in the credits. So I don't know. I don't know if she did the voice. I would assume so, but who knows? Soundtrack is Goblin. One of the outstanding things about this movie, in my opinion. Yeah. It's kind of like Hellraiser that we reviewed a few episodes ago. I'd say this is also one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. And then some filming locations. So two notable ones. The Dance Academy was the famous building Zum Walfisch, which translates to the whale, and I apologize for my German. Yeah,
that building. I know that building very well, the whale. No, I don't, but it was very pretty.
Well, it's in Freiburg, Germany, so that's
I'm sorry, I think this daiquiri is already hitting me, but go on.
Yeah, you're the goofy one this time. I was in Tenacious D. You're the And then the other notable building, which I'm assuming this building, they didn't say what location it was, but I'm guessing it's when Susie is talking to the psychologist. But they filmed at the BMW building in Bavaria, Germany as well.
Yeah, but, I'm assuming that looks pretty modern for the time, so I'm guessing that's where it was.
That's why I'm guessing that's the BMW building. It didn't say, but I was kind of more interested in the Dance Academy anyway, because that building was very interesting looking. So I'll try again. Zum Walfisch. The Whale. And I don't even know why the building is called The Whale, but I thought that was interesting.
Wait, so did that stand in for the exterior and the interiors?
Definitely the exterior. Interior, possibly. That's like one of those things where the interior was so large, and it's hard to know, right? I would like to think that the interior was the same, but it's also so crazy in there with all of the wacky colors and everything that it's entirely possible that was just a made up set.
Okay.
But because the outside is so strangely, like, the architecture is really striking, it makes me wonder if they were allowed to film inside the building as well. It actually kind of reminds me, like, Italian cinema is really interesting because they had their own bout with, like, fascism and stuff. So they have this whole, like, architectural world in the country where there's, like, all these very brutalistic buildings and stuff. And one film that really shows them off is The Conformist. And I kind of was getting conformist vibes from this building. So that's another, I know the exterior is, well, and it's also in Germany, which, you know, also has a bit of a history, but, like,
Yeah.
it's hard to say because it's in Germany, but it reminds me of that movie because in that movie they go to all these really crazy, like, old fascist buildings in Italy, but this isn't filmed in Italy. So
I mean,
it's
I would
weird.
actually,
It reminds me of The Conformist, but it can't be because it's in a different country.
I don't remember a lot about The Conformist. I do remember there being lots of very straight, stark lines. And I
Yeah.
would actually kind of say this is the anti-conformist because there's a lot of rounded edges in the movie. And I have a theory on that, why that is later. But there was a lot of roundness in this film.
Well, now that I've gotten all of the base facts out of the way, T, what did you think? I'm very curious, especially since you've been anticipating this film for such a long time. I'm very interested in what you think now that we've finally seen it.
So, this is my first time watching this, and I was pleasantly surprised. This is a really good movie. In addition to it being interesting story-wise, it's also a very visually beautiful film, too. Now, I've always talked about one of my favorite things about not my favorite things, one of my favorite scenes in Silence of the Lambs is the angel scene that you told me about before I saw it. You spoiled it. How dare you? I'm just kidding.
I thought you'd seen it before I ever talked to you about it. I could have sworn that was, like, one of your all-time favorite films when I met you.
I hadn't seen it until we were in that class together that you were like, this is an awful professor. I'm crucifying him in the review. That's when I'd seen it. And I think you were kind of giving me a heads up as to what to expect in the movie. But, like, that scene is visually beautiful despite the very dark and disturbing imagery. And I feel like this one is the exact same way. It's so beautiful. It almost, in a way, overshadows a little bit of the darkness, and I for some reason I really like sort of that balance, but the darkness is still there and it's still very heavy, but it makes it feel very theatrical and over the top in, not like a ridiculous way, but over the top in like a Baz Luhrmann kind of way. Just, you can tell there was a lot of effort put into the way things look, the way things were lit, the way things were cut together, the way even the people talked. I mean, I did still have, some minor issues with it, but overall, I really, really enjoyed this film.
Good. I had a feeling you would. It's got a lot of the stuff that I know that you like. You kind of stated a bunch of them, but, like, the costumes, the sets, the color, like a lot of horror movies. Kind of, I mean, it depends on the era, right? And another thing that'll come up later in this review, I'm going to get into kind of the subgenre this belongs to. But yeah, that's, like, this is a movie I recommend to a lot of people, even if they don't like horror movies. I think if you can get through the opening, it's pretty easy to watch, and it's very visually striking and just beautiful. But that's a fun thing. What did you think of the opening? Because when this came out, that first death, when Susie arrives and is shooed away, that was considered one of the most, like, disturbing, like, kills in any movie. Like, I think it got to the point where, like, some people wouldn't play the movie because they thought it was, like, glorifying it or whatever. But, like, at the time, that was considered kind of trashy or, like, overdone.
Right.
That first death, what did you think about it? Or just in general, the violence in the movie?
So the violence in the movie was actually, I'd say this is pretty tame. I actually feel like if it was to be re-rated nowadays, I feel like it might get a PG-13 rating instead of an R. I will say the first death, though, was kind of funny. And that's actually where I got the name for my cocktail, The Most Casual Murder Ever. Because I don't know what it was, but it was just like every time that she was stabbed, it was just like the person was like, eh. It was like, eh. I'm like, okay. and stab. Okay, wait, okay, and stab. It's just like
What made
something
me
about it
laugh.
was just so casual. I was like, does this person even like what they're doing? Like, what's their deal?
It's been a while since I've seen this movie, but I laughed as well. But what made me laugh was the fact that every time she got stabbed, it was like exactly in the same spot.
Oh
And
my god,
also
I
the
actually don't
arm
think I
would
noticed
like
that.
come from out of frame and just get her again in the same spot, and it just kept happening. And I thought that was, because if it was like more realistic, it's like it would be all over the place. It'd probably be more stabs, it'd be more violent. But it was just like the way it was done to me, I thought was funny because it was just once every few minutes, and every time the thing would stab her again, it was just always perfectly in the same spot.
Right? It was like I didn't remember it being exactly this, but I was just like, it was just so mechanical. That's why I named my cocktail the most casual murder, because that was it. Now the shocking part was when they pulled back her body and then her friend has been impaled by the skylight. Now that was a little shocking because I didn't really expect that to happen. But everything else, it was pretty. I will say, I guess the dog attack was, I guess, a little gruesome, but you can also tell that because they use two different shots to really accomplish that. There's one where they have the dog puppet hand just
Yup.
on his neck, and then then it cuts to a different angle, and you can tell that he's clearly like pulling at some like steak or something. But I
Yeah.
guess maybe the stringiness of it, could make it look a lot worse than it is.
I think it was a mixture of like safety, like you don't actually want to have a dog like biting a person, but then the other is like, I mean, it's the fact that the opening scene was considered like too racy at the time kind of shows that I think part of that decision was also like, we don't want to get banned from every theater in the world. Like,
Listen,
let's have the dog eating him in a wide,
I
so
mean,
you get what's going on, but it's not like as overt as other things.
it wasn't
Um,
like the Nightmare on Elm Streets where they had like girls in like short shirts, not wearing pants, running down the street, getting stabbed. That's a little bit racier than I think this one was. I know that's just my
Depending,
opinion.
it's funny you bring that series up because I just binged the entire like 7 movies just like last week or something. But yeah, like that one. I mean, there were some kills in that movie that were pretty scary for the time. The thing, I agree with you. I think if this came out now, it would probably get PG-13. The thing that I think put it over the edge at the time was that it was drawn out. Like, I think the entire murder is probably like 5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's how it's drawn out. They also had that one scene of like the knife going into like a beating heart. I think that
Oh,
would
I
have probably
forgot.
been
I
very
forgot about that.
disturbing.
You're right.
There was a lot of blood, even though it's 70s blood,
It's
where it looks
70s
like it's
blood, yeah.
freaking ketchup. Then she gets hanged, like, and then, as you said, her friend. It's not even impaled. It's like a piece of the ceiling, like, it goes into her. But impaled
Yeah,
makes me think of like a spear or something. It's almost like
it's like when somebody falls off a roof and they land on like the gate spike or something. That's how I looked
yeah,
at it. To me, that's still impaling, but that's the way I looked at it.
yes. But I think that's more the reason. I mean, like, even for horror, another horror movie I know you like is The Omen, and that's one where, like, at the time that was seen as like super disturbing. But if you see the kills in that movie are
I
pretty
mean,
tame by today's standards as well.
I think
But
the
that one's like
original, I think the original The Omen by today's standards, I would classify more as a horror comedy.
kind of.
The
It's
original
got some funny
Omen.
moments, right? Um, it's got some funny moments, but at the time, the reason I'm saying that is like that came out around the same time as this, and that's another one where the kills at the time were considered really scary, but by today's standards, I don't think it would matter.
Yeah.
Also, this is a European film, so I feel like that's always been the thing. Americans are afraid of sex, and Europeans are afraid of violence. So I think that might have also had something to do with why it was so so offensive at the time. It might have been like European movie critics or something had like something against that kill, but I couldn't find anything about it. But I think part of also like there's a reason the initial death is or murder is so like over the top. I think he was kind of trying to filter people out. Like, if you don't like this, get out of the movie because it's this.
Right. Well, I mean, I will say everything after it though is pretty, I think, tame compared to that. What I was gonna say though was this Argento's first English language film, or had he done English language films before this?
So this is not an English language film. This was something I didn't even do notes on it, but I had a feeling this would come up. How many Italian films have you seen, T?
The Bicycle Thief.
Anything else?
I don't think so.
So this is like an interesting thing with Italian film, and you, especially, I think they started doing this in the 60s. They've always done this. So the thing about Italians is they really like dubs.
Okay.
That's how they always operate. Is the most famous example of this is the Few Dollars trilogy. You know, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, Few Dollars More. They are Italian films, even though they are, cowboy movies.
Those are they're spaghetti westerns.
Italian films.
They're spaghetti westerns.
So those are also in English. But the thing about that, as well as this movie, is that Italians do this thing where they cast whoever from whatever country, and they all act in their own language. And then, in post, they dub it in multiple languages, depending on where, if it's going to England or the US, it's in English. If it's in Italy, it's in Italian. And basically, everyone is just dubbed over. And that's this
that
movie.
explains it.
If you rewatch it, you'll notice some of the lip syncing is weird, and that's because it's all ADR. They just on set are speaking whatever language they speak, and then later on they just dub it over in whatever language that print is going out to.
See, I just thought some of the characters had really bad ADR.
Yeah, that's kind of a thing with Italian film is sometimes because that's the thing, like if it is a different language, obviously the dub is not the same actor.
Yeah.
Like if you're watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in Italy, someone dubbed over Clint Eastwood's lines. So it would there's probably a bunch of Italian film fans who are like, I don't know why Clint Eastwood got so famous. He sounded really bad in the movie. It's because some Italian voice actor trying to sound like Clint Eastwood. But yeah, it's like a very quirky thing about Italian film. And like I have a copy of the DVD. And it's got 4 different languages. It's got English, French, German, and Italian that I could have watched the movie dubbed in. Because those are like the main dubs that they made for the movie.
See, you should have watched it, and you should have at least watched a few scenes in some other languages just to see if like the voices sound similar. To see if they cast them a certain way.
I have been thinking of watching it in another language with the English subtitles just to see if it comes off as odd. As it does in English. And that's the other kind of quirky thing about Italian films that do this is, like we do our anime episodes every year, and that's like a whole thing is subs versus dubs. You can't even make that argument with these types of Italian films because, as I said, they're all speaking different languages. So you literally can't do it another way. No matter what language you're watching it in, it is going to be a dub. Even if you want to do it in Italian with subtitles, it's actress.
Yeah,
it's like there's no way to do it like the original way or like the legit way. Unlike the anime fans will always say like, oh, the dub is always terrible. It's always better in Japanese. It's like with Italian films that do this kind of dubbing thing. You don't have any other option. You can change the language, but no matter what, you're still going to get the weird, odd performances from voice actors.
Well, when I said bad ADR, I thought all the voice performances were okay. There was just some of them I thought they'd gone back and maybe they had a mic in a wrong place for some of the actors, because I was noticing what their mouth was saying and what they were saying were not adding up. But other people they did, which is why I thought that they just, had a bad ADR. They had a bad, thing, and they had to go back and ADR it or something.
The English dub for this does not bother me. I think the performances are pretty good. It's still like noticeable. I will say that. Like if it's the sort of thing that bothers you, it's going to bother you. There's no way around it. But the reason I think it works so well in the Sergio Leone movies is in those movies famously like there's barely any dialogue. It's all just people staring dramatically at each other and shooting. So I feel like it doesn't matter so much in those movies. In this one, I don't think there's a ton of dialogue, but for whatever reason, the English dub, at least in my opinion, you'll notice it, but I don't think there was like any bad performances. And some of the ones that come off as a little hammy kind of work because this is sort of it's like a really well made and artistic movie, but it is also horror schlock, so it works both ways. So it's the sort of thing, as I said, if that kind of thing bothers you, if you hate dubs, sorry, you might not like a ton of Italian movies, and there's not really anything you can do about it. But
no, it's like I said, it really didn't bother me, and for the most part, I didn't actually notice it. I think for most of the film, I think there might have been like a scene towards the end where I kind of noticed it. For the most part, I didn't pick up on it.
I'm just impressed. It feels like it's one of those things that a lot of people know. So I'm very happy that I got to educate you a bit on Italian cinema and how for like a whole number of decades they had this thing where they would just hire actors from a bunch of different countries and dub them over. Because it's, as I said, watch like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and you'll see what I mean. It's very funny how it's like, I don't know why they decided to do it that way, but it's like a thing that is very specific to Italian cinema, and a lot of movies do it.
I mean, my favorite dubbing fact is that Vladimir Zelensky was the voice of Paddington in the Ukraine release.
There you go. There you go. That is interesting. I could have seen him doing that. Now I want to see Paddington in Ukrainian because I'm curious how he sounds like, because Paddington has kind of a youthful voice, and Zelensky, I think it's just because of all the times I've heard him talk about the war, but I don't think of him as very like Paddington-esque.
Watch his show on Netflix, Servant of the People.
Oh, I didn't even know it was on Netflix. I know about it. I know about that show, but anyway, so back to this movie. We'll get into Dario Argento. So I guess I'll just rattle off all my facts. I'm curious what you had to say about him. But so he is a famous Italian director, especially in a specific genre that I'll get into a little bit later. But so he was born in Rome, Italy on September 7th, 1940. His parents are a famed Italian producer named Salvatore Argento and a Brazilian fashion model named Elda Luxardo. He's highly inspired by Italian folk tales, childhood trauma, Grimm's fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen, and Edgar Allan Poe, which makes sense because another thing I thought you would like about this movie is that it feels kind of fairy tale-esque with the way that it's presented, especially that opening where she's flying into the... Before you even see Susie Bannion, there's like that, Susie Bannion flew into the German airport. And, like it sounds like the opening to a fairy tale.
Right. I like that because it's like it just cut out like 10 minutes of a movie having to explain that visually. I'm like,
exactly, but it also has like that dreamlike quality. Like if it's very odd and it doesn't come up later in the movie, but and that with the Goblin score, it has kind of this spooky fairy tale, once upon a time kind of quality to it. That at least that's how it feels to me every time I see it.
I like that.
So Dario wrote, like he started getting into writing screenplays. I believe he was a journalist before that, but he went on to write some notable screenplays. And speaking of Sergio Leone, he wrote Once Upon a Time in the West. His first big international hit was his first, so his directorial debut was actually a big international hit, and I bet you've even heard of it, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
I haven't heard of that.
Oh my goodness, that's
I haven't.
frankly,
Sorry.
as I said, I'm not going to name drop it yet, but there's like a whole type of movie that I think you might get really into. That Dario Argento is sort of one of the figureheads of this subgenre. But so he's collaborated with George A. Romero. Later in life, he collaborated on him with a 2-part film called Two Evil Eyes and Dawn of the Dead. Um, and the next part of my notes has to do with a little bit of expanded universe stuff with this movie. But so, what did you learn about Dario Argento? I'm curious. Didn't even know you did any research.
Oh, I really have. I really didn't. I didn't really do any research. I just would. I don't know how I found out that it might be his first English film. But I didn't research him at all. I mean, I can really quick if you want me to. But...
Well, no. Yeah, like earlier I mentioned him, and when you corrected my pronunciation of his name, you also said that you had some stuff to say about him. So I'm curious what you had in mind.
Well, no. So I just know several people who are named that, and that's typically how it's pronounced. Of course, I'm going by the Spanish pronunciation of it.
No, you're right. I screwed it up. After I said it, I immediately, after you corrected me, I'm like, oh, you're right. It is Dario. So yes.
You see, you got too much into your MTV days with Daria, and you were like,
Daria and Dario. That is so funny.
That's weird to me.
I thought you had something.
Well, no, I had
fact or something.
I didn't have a notable fact. I think I had some stuff to talk about when we get to talking more about the film itself and some of the stuff that's going on with it.
Gotcha. So I realized in my notes I forgot to mention again, on top of this not making a lot of money, this film only was nominated for 4 awards. And hilariously, some of them are those DVD awards I talked about during our Hellraiser review.
That's so sad because it
didn't win any, but it did win. The one award it did win was the Online Film and Television Association Hall of Fame 2021. So it only just 2 years ago won its only award.
Oh, okay. Only, let's see, only like almost 50 years later.
As I said, man, this movie gets a lot of love, so it's hard for me to feel too offended. It was shocking to me to see that it didn't make any money and that it didn't win any awards. Again, this is like critically hailed nowadays. Like everyone's heard of this movie. Like it's crazy to me that it and that too. It didn't even win an award until 2021. Like.
Right, and it's even known outside of horror circles because sometimes a lot of like horror films people will be like, oh, this movie, and typically people outside of like the horror landscape, are kind of like, I haven't heard of that, but this is one I think most people, who pay any attention to film at all have heard of at some point.
Exactly, and that's why I'm so surprised. And I also, as I said at the beginning of this review, like I recommend this to everybody because I don't think you really need to be into horror to like this, because a lot of what makes it good has nothing to do with being scary. Like a lot of it is just visually gorgeous, and the atmosphere and the music and also like even the story I think would appeal to a lot of people. Kind of the fish out of water story of like going to this dance academy in a foreign country. Like, I think that works in the horror aspect of the story, but I also think it's just kind of an interesting sort of, I don't know. I feel like this is a film that would appeal to a lot of women, partly because of the colors and the sets and the costumes, but it's a very like feminine kind of story. There's a lot of like friendships and obviously like the whole aspect of it being about witches and stuff. I think this is something which is funny too. Like outside of Dario's girlfriend, it's like I was expecting the production designers and stuff there'd be more women working on this movie. So it's crazy. It's like, oh, the production design was Giuseppe, and the costume designer was, I thought that was interesting. But, so you liked this movie, T. How much did you like this movie? What if I told you that this is part of a greater cinematic universe?
I would actually be very, very intrigued by that because...
Okay. So nowadays we think of trilogies or, cinematic universes as like Marvel or like, Star Wars, uh, James Bond, what have you. Like, there's Terminator 1, there's Terminator 2, there's Terminator 3. There's a bunch of filmmakers that do kind of thematic trilogies. One that is talked about a lot is the Three Colors trilogy, partly because Edgar Wright sort of parodied that for his Cornetto trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those. So this is part one of Dario Argento's Three Mothers Witch trilogy. So each one of the films has to do with a specific witch, and it has this whole mythology of all of witchcraft was created by these three matriarchs, and each one of the films is about one of the matriarchs. So Suspiria, the first film, came out in 1977. The witch in question is Helena Marcos, or Mater Suspiriorum, the Mother of Sighs.
Or the Black... Was she also called the Black Queen?
Yes, she was, and they mentioned that in the movie. And so the idea, I've only seen this film. I've been wanting to see the other two. But basically, so they created witchcraft, and they had an architect design them these sort of, these places where they would reside and sort of control the world.
Okay.
And they were all built by the same architect, and they all had magical powers. They were almost kind of like lightning rods of magical energy. And obviously the first one is the Dance Academy. So then the second film in the trilogy is called Inferno, and I believe it was the movie he did right after this. It came out in 1980. And so the witch in question there, oh wow, not two. None of them, let me make sure. Yeah, so Helena Marcos is the only one where they give a name. The other two witches are only talked about by their, Mater names. So Inferno is Mater Tenebrarum,
Okay.
the Mother of Darkness. And so her palace, witch coven house, whatever, is in New York City, and that's where that film takes place. And the final film in the trilogy took a very long time to come out. It came out all the way in 2007, and that film is called Mother of Tears. That witch is Mater Lacrimarum, or the Mother of Tears.
Okay.
And she is supposedly the most beautiful and powerful of the three of them. And his daughter, Asia Argento, is the star of that film. I'm guessing she's the protagonist. Who knows? Maybe she is the Mother of Tears in that film. But
well,
so there's...
hopefully, I haven't seen it, but hopefully she can act. We don't have another Sofia Coppola situation on our hands here.
Well, so I might as well get into this. We are not a gossip channel. I try and avoid talking about this sort of stuff. But
my
she
God.
had a bit of
We
a
got some
Me
tea.
Too moment. Yeah, there's some hot tea, and it makes me... So I don't know if I've ever brought this up on the show before, but one of my favorite people, one of my personal role models, is Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. So right at the end of his life, he had split from his wife, and he was actually dating Asia Argento, and she showed up in a number of episodes of his show. And it's funny because I saw her in the show, and then after he passed away, it mentioned that he was dating her, and I was like, oh, that makes sense, because she was in several episodes before the end of his life. So the thing with her, and she's a director in her own right, I should throw that out there. I haven't seen any of her films, but just like her father, she took up directing after
Right.
Having a successful acting career in a lot of his movies and movies outside of his. But her kind of juicy situation was that she was in some sort of friendly relationship. I don't know if the guy was an actor. I'm not really sure. For some reason, she was having some kind of friendly relationship with a 17-year-old boy.
Oh.
And it got sexual. And I feel bad that all of this came out after Anthony Bourdain's passing, because he wasn't around to really defend himself. Thankfully, when all the stuff was hitting the fan, there was a text message from the two of them leaked, where he just kind of, from what I remember, was like, I don't want to know, I don't want any part of this. Like, so I don't know. Hopefully he wasn't in on it. It's kind of one of those iffy things, because the boy was like 17. He wasn't super young, but it was still, if he was an actor, that also is like a layer onto this. I should have probably looked it up before talking about it. I just know you like gossip, and you like, kind of.
Listen, I don't
stuff.
love the drama. It loves me.
Well,
No, but that's super interesting, actually. But I mean, it's actually kind of not. I mean, well, first off, the fact that Anthony Bourdain was dating her is like not surprising at all. Like, he wouldn't just date someone normal. He would have to date
he
somebody.
seems to like Italian women. His ex-wife was Italian too.
Well, I was gonna say he would have to date somebody who has ties to like some deep thinking, artistic genius type person. He couldn't just date someone named Deborah.
Right?
Like, you know what I mean?
I don't know, man. His taste in women is cool. The woman he was married to and had a daughter with was a competitive martial artist. I believe it was jiu-jitsu was what she competed in. So tough chick. And then Aja Argento, and maybe I don't know if it's Asia or Aja. Aja sounds more Italian, so I'm going to say that. But she, I don't like. That's the thing about Anthony Bourdain, is he wasn't pretentious. He really liked like garbage horror movies and stuff. Like, he liked a lot of the same stuff I like. I think that's why I like him so much. But I
would say, yeah.
Dario
That's what's kind of
Argento. Yes.
I was gonna say that's the thing that's kind of cool about him is he was open-minded and exploring different things. That's kind of why he really took off. Although I do think sometimes he got a little soapboxy for me, but for the most part, his goal was to expose the world to, the different kinds of cooking cultures that there are out there.
Cooking cultures, but also culture in general. Like, again, we're not even going to touch it with the stuff going on in the world right now, but he did some episodes in like the Middle East and things, and it's not an accident that his final show was on CNN. He basically was a journalist. Like, he cared about like culture and cooking and things like that, but he was probably one of the best people to like be on the ground talking to regular people, because that's a lot of what he did in the show. It's like, oh, I met up with this local person who does this, and he's an advocate for the community, or what have you. And so that's kind of what he was about. But so he dated Aja Argento. She got into some hot water for that, but as far as I know, she hasn't been in any hot water since. And I don't know. It's one of those things. It was kind of during the whole Me Too movement thing, and she got called out for that. So I don't know. But moving on, I mentioned that a new horror subgenre has been unlocked. We've got enough. We've got enough experience points, T. We've unlocked a new level.
Yay, we're leveling up.
So, I mentioned before that Dario Argento was known as kind of the figurehead of this style of Italian film, and that style is the giallo genre. Now, have you heard of giallo films before?
I've heard of Jello films, but not giallo.
What's a Jello film?
You've never seen a Jello commercial before?
That's not a Jello film. That's a Jello commercial. What's a Jello film?
I have no idea. I just made that up.
Just being a smarty pants.
I am. I really am.
So I take it, no, you've never heard of the giallo genre. Okay, so this is a horror subgenre that is specific to Italy. I don't know why, but giallo literally means yellow, so I don't know why they called it that. But the yellow genre. Dario Argento's previous film Deep Red is probably the best example of it.
He made a movie called Deep Red, and it's called Yellow. Okay, I think they missed the boat on naming that, but go on.
So the thing is, like, this film is roped into that genre, and it's one of those things where depending on who you talk to, they're gonna get really mad that it's roped into this. Or maybe not. I don't know if I would consider this a giallo film, but so the tropes and this is, I think you're gonna like this genre. Based on what I know about you, I think you might like this. So as I said, it's a horror subgenre, and the tropes usually include the following. So it's usually a murder mystery.
Okay.
It's usually a thriller. There usually includes slasher violence, psychological horror, eroticism or sexploitation, I guess, depending on who made the film. And this is where it'll get contentious with people, and some people will adamantly say that Suspiria is not a giallo film because it does not usually include supernatural elements in the film. It doesn't mean that it never does, but it's less frequently a thing, and that's where some people will say, yes, this is a giallo film, and no, it isn't.
Well, can't something be partially into it? You know, like it's
I'd
kind of
say
like,
so.
I mean, it's like how Silence of the Lambs peaked. Some people put it in horror, some people put it in thriller. I personally put it in the thriller category. I don't really think it's a horror film.
It's kind of one of those things where I'd love to know what Dario thinks, because he was one of the people who invented this genre. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like he already planned this as a trilogy of like separate witch movies.
Okay.
You know, the Three Mothers trilogy. So I'd love to know if he considers it a giallo film, because as I said, like he might have considered this like a separate thing, and he just ended up using a lot of tropes because it's like a genre he helped create. Right. So I don't know. I'd love to know if he considers it. I think it could potentially. I think so. Less than the supernatural thing, I'd kind of edge towards it maybe not being a giallo film. One final thing about it. I will say, so giallo did influence the slasher genre. It predates it. You know, it started in the 60s through the 70s. Like that's when it was a dominant thing in Italy. But
okay.
You know, slashers obviously took a lot of influence from it. But the one thing, and this is part of the reason I think you'd like giallo films, the big thing about it, as I said, it's usually a murder mystery. But typically in a giallo film, the mystery killer, their identity is a secret and isn't revealed until the end of the film. So think Scooby-Doo. It's like, there's a masked killer, and you know, and that's also where I'd say it differs from slashers, because we've talked about a few slashers on this show, and I would say a slasher, well, first off, the killer is known. Like everyone's talking about Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. Everyone knows, oh my God, he's coming to get me. Right. And also, like we talked about it in our Friday the 13th review, but I would say that slasher monsters or killers or whatever are more based around urban legends than it being like a mystery killer. The one slasher I would say kind of fits the giallo genre is Scream, because in Scream, that's like the deal, is the killer is one of the friend group, and every Scream movie, it's like, ooh, who is the killer? I know it's one of the people who's getting killed off, but who is it? So that's the reason I hesitate to call Suspiria a giallo film, not because of the supernatural elements, but because there isn't really, like, there is a mystery killer, but it's also not really a mystery. Like, I would say for the viewer, you can kind of tell something supernatural is going on. And every time someone is murdered, there isn't a literal killer. Like, it to me, the way I interpret that opening murder is that it was like some kind of thing that was conjured by the witches. I don't think there was an actual killer stabbing her.
See, okay. So I was actually, towards the beginning, was actually going to say that this movie kind of felt like a whodunit to me a little bit. Yeah. Because as soon as everybody realizes something weird's going on, which is the point, which I think that point where at least our main character becomes sus about everything, is when the second person dies. And then she's like, okay, what's going on here? Based on, can you go through the elements of giallo again?
Murder mystery, psychological thriller, slasher violence, eroticism / sexploitation, not normally supernatural, and the killer's identity is revealed at the end.
Okay, so the elements that didn't apply are the sexploitation, eroticism, and the not usually supernatural. Because I do think the killer's identity was revealed at the end, because we know something's going on, we just don't know what it is. And I would classify the killers at the end being the Coven of Witches. So
Yes.
I would say by using Occam's razor, more things apply to it than don't apply to it.
I agree. And that's where, like I said before, I'd love to hear what Dario thinks because, as I said, maybe he just accidentally used a bunch of tropes because he was used to using them in his past films. Like the bird with the crystal plumage is also a Giallo film. So maybe he was just like used to doing it because
Yeah.
I will say I do think the film has some eroticism. I don't think it has sexploitation. There's not really any nudity in this film, but I do think there's like a little bit of eroticism with the dance academy. There's a little bit of that handsome dude who also goes to the academy and stuff. And there's also that really cool, moody sort of scene in the pool.
See,
I just don't think any of the eroticism is overt. It's not like the 80s where you've got the girls like taking their shirts off to go skinny dipping in the camp's lake or anything like that. But it's like for the time, I feel like there might have been a little bit of pretty girls dancing.
I guess maybe that could have been considered because nothing about those scenes felt remotely erotic.
Yeah.
To me at all, because
No,
like I
I
mean,
feel
like
that. I definitely think it's less and that too. To be honest, I've only seen like 2 or 3 Giallo films. Watching this, I kind of want to watch some more. One that maybe we'll review on the show, but I definitely would recommend to you since you liked this. His previous film, Deep Red, is far more of what a Giallo film is. And the cool thing, I love this about Deep Red, and this isn't a review of Deep Red, but anyone who's listening, if they want to watch it, can know this too. The cool thing about Deep Red is that at the beginning of the film, when our hero is exploring the crime scene after he discovers, the dead body, if you pay attention, you can see the killer at the beginning of the film. And it was intentionally like you can see them in frame hiding from the hero. So if you like. It's like Where's Waldo? Like when he's exploring the crime scene, you can see the killer still in the room. And if and I did it. I knew that little factoid when I saw the movie, and when I sat down to watch it in like 2011 on my Netflix streaming thing, I was like, it's anyway. It's very fun, and I think you would like that if you ended up watching it.
See, okay, so. Oh, first off, yeah, that's super interesting about Big Red because I was actually interested to watch more of his films because I watched it on Tubi. It's free right now on Tubi, it was going to autoplay into Inferno immediately after it. So I was actually interested in checking that next one out too. See, to me though, I think one of the things I really liked about this is that it did kind of flick a mystery to me. I know you kind of said like there's not really a murderer because it's like a supernatural event, but to me, like using supernatural magic, to me is no different than using a physical murder weapon. That's their weapon of choice. Is something supernatural?
I agree. I agree with the killing off of people, like the slasher elements of it. I completely agree. Align with Giallo. The whole mystery killer thing is where it's kind of a mystery, but also it has something to do with the higher ups at the dance academy. And there isn't also exactly an unmasking. Like the closest thing you could say is when she confronts Marcos at the end of the film. You could even say, because Marcos is invisible, that there's a literal like unmasking kind of.
But it was even still kind of like, but who of the higher ups are involved?
That's true.
Because like I think not all the higher ups that we see are involved. In that back room at the end, all we remember seeing is the weird butler, the mistress of the academy, I guess her person that's just beneath her, and then some random little boy.
You know what I think kind of actually works in place of unmasking the villain is finding the secret entrance. That was kind of, if I were to err on the side of this being a Giallo film, I would say that works in place of unmasking the villain because it's like, oh, there's this room. I know they're still here. I know Marcos is here. Like they always turn right instead of going out the door. So like throughout the movie, it's like, where are they going? Where are they going? And there's also at the very beginning of the movie, the first victim says something to someone off, blocked by the doorway, and you don't know what she says. And then later on, she's able to remember, like, oh, it's the flower, and you turn it, and all this other stuff to find the secret room. So right. I would argue if I was going to say this is Giallo, I'd say that kind of works in place of unmasking the villain, because the mystery isn't so much who's doing it as where are they going? Like, where is their secret hideout?
It's where and how. So like if you know
Yes.
who does it, where, how, and almost why. Those are all kind of solved in that sort of sequence.
True.
And I guess the reason they kill people is because they discover their secret, basically.
Basically.
I don't understand though why they killed the blind guy.
Because the dog supposedly bit the kid.
Yeah, but then we see the
That
kid.
also,
But we see the kid at the end, and he's fine. Because they basically said she like tries to be like, oh my god, he like bit his face or something. He looks fine at the end. And then I thought, oh well, they're witches, they can use magic, but they're very poignantly say they can only use their magic to do harm. So
well, I took that as like an ironic death, right? Because they say, oh, the dog bit the kid. He's like, impossible. My dog's very peaceful and whatever, and they get into a big fight. I feel like it was magic, because why would his dog was nice, it wouldn't attack him. So I feel like, what's the most ironic way to kill this guy but having his dog eat him, and then
yeah,
obviously the dog would get put down because it just killed a person, so they're going to kill the dog. So that's how I took that anyway. I think, as far, because anyone would be on that guy's side. It's like, really, like, and even if it did bite the kid, it's like one time, and maybe the kid, whatever. They're
maybe
witches,
the dog
they're jerks.
the dog, they always say that that pets and children can see ghosts and things like that. Maybe the dog could sense evil and it became hostile, and so when the magic was kind of taking place, the dog could sense the magic, and that's kind of why he goes before he becomes all Cujo like.
I also think not seeing him bite the kid was obviously intentional, because I think you're supposed to kind of doubt, did the dog bite the kid or did the dog not? Like, it's still at that point in the movie where they haven't even mentioned witchcraft yet. So if you're not the sort of that's one of those things too with this movie being so well known, is like, if you went into it blind, you wouldn't know anything about it being witches until about like the halfway point of the movie.
Yeah.
So obviously I had heard all about this movie when I saw it for the first time, so I knew it was witches. But I feel like that might also be part of it, is like, oh, did the dog bite the kid? Did the and
see,
who knows,
I didn't know if he bit the kid, or if that was being used as a precursor to get rid of him.
It's a good question, especially in retrospect, because when you know what's going on, it is kind of like, well, why did the witches just suddenly decide to be angry with this guy? It makes me
they
think,
they say when you lose one of your senses, all your other senses become heightened. So I don't know. Maybe we don't know, but maybe he could sense something was going on.
that was so quirky too, by the way, how their piano player was like a blind guy. It was so goofy. It's like the fact that he could play the piano so well, which makes sense. I'm sure there's plenty of blind people who could do that.
It just seemed like the fact that we never saw anything happen. That's kind of why I was like, well, was this a pretext? But I did want to talk about, because I mentioned earlier about the you compared the styling of it to the Conformista, and I said, well, to me it was opposite Conformista because there was lots of round shapes, and to me that has to do a lot with femininity. Everything was very round. There was not very many sharp edges. Even I don't know if you remember, but even the blade that the killer was using to take out, I forget what her name is. I think her name is Sarah. When he's trying to get into the door, even the blade is rounded. It's not like a typical like switchblade or box cutter. Maybe that's a specific type of blade, but I find that very notable. And with the whole school being run by witches, which is typically who are typically female, because there's witches and warlocks, and then it being a dance academy, that's how, if you remember, historically with witches, they talk about women going and dancing in the woods together, and that was supposed to be like witchcraft use. So that makes sense to me. But there was a lot of like feminine energy put into this movie. Like you said, I was surprised, like you are, to find out the production designer was a man and not a woman, because a lot of these touches, came into play. You talked about how these movies even typically feature eroticism, that we really don't have much of a male gaze going on in this film. Even when we have, like the dancing scenes where everyone's wearing, tight leotards, or when they're in the pool, nothing's there really isn't any lingering gazes or anything like that going on. Like when they're not talking, it's from above. We're not looking at them in the frontal region. So I thought that was quite impressive, that there was such a feminine energy carried throughout this, not just in the story with our protagonist and antagonist being female, but also through the set design, the weapons, all that, interesting things as well.
I completely agree. And I think the reason I was thinking of The Conformist was mostly just that The Conformist was visually striking. It's been a number of years since I've seen The Conformist, but you're not wrong. I definitely think that the type of architecture and stuff was different. It stood out in my mind because I was like, that's another movie where the architecture is very pronounced. Not so much that it's like the same. But I definitely agree. And bringing that up again, like I'd almost have to sit through this again to like really look at it through a comb. Like when I'm thinking, because eroticism can mean a lot of things. Like when you think of eroticism these days, the male gaze comes up a lot, but I think you can be erotic without being a creep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and that's why also when I was looking up the giallo tropes, like they said eroticism and sexploitation, because those are like two different things. And yeah, like I don't think it really dwells on them like lusting after boys or anything, but there's like some stuff that could be like subtly erotic without being overtly sexualized. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like when I think of like one of the best erotic films I've seen in a movie, I think of Double Indemnity. There's this scene where I think when he meets her for the first time, she's coming down the stairs and there nothing's happening and there's nothing sexual going on, but there is just so much sexual tension there. I was reaching for ice water in that scene. I don't know how they did that, but they did.
Oh yeah. Well, that movie is super notable because that's like the whole thing is, that's before a time when you would have steamy sex scenes in movies, but like the whole motivation in that movie is like that they're basically having an affair. So that's like a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Yeah. And I definitely think out of the tropes I listed, eroticism would be kind of at the bottom.
Yeah.
I do think there could be potentially an argument for there being an erotic element to this film, even though it's not as overt as probably some other giallo films. The fact that sexploitation is listed makes me think there might be some ones where they do get kind of like the 80s slasher films with the nudity and things like that, especially since this was popular in the 60s and 70s, especially the 70s. But yeah, man, Dario Argento, I need to see more of his movies. I've seen this in Deep Red, but I definitely, a lot of people really like Inferno, and some people would even say it's better than this film because it was kind of more thought out, it being the second film in the trilogy and everything. So that's one I really need to see. And The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is another one that I know you will like. I haven't seen it, but I know it's got a lot of the sort of things like in this movie that you like. But I need to see more of his stuff. But I love this movie, and I'm glad you finally got a chance to see it.
And it was it was super enjoyable. I did want to ask though. I did have some plot questions.
Yes.
Okay. So the scene with the maggots falling from the ceiling. First off, I'm like 98% sure that there was an episode of Castle where they borrowed from this scene because that's how they discover one of the bodies where there was maggots falling from the ceiling. But they were like, oh, there was some spoiled food up there. Was it actually spoiled food? I couldn't tell. Or was it like a body or something? Or are we not supposed to know?
I actually think that was not intended by the witches, partly because of how disgusted they are with it, and also the fact that the last thing they want to do is have everyone sleeping where Mother Marcos might be discovered. You know what I mean? Like, it felt like that actually was like an emergency. And especially after they just like magicked Susie into staying on campus, like the last thing they would want to happen is something that would creep her out and make her want to leave again. So I don't know. Like, and that's the thing with a lot of this movie is all of the stuff that happens, we never see the witches making any plans until the end of the movie where they're saying, "Oh, kill that American bitch," but like we don't really know what their goals are. We just see people.
Yeah, because I was I was just kind of like, why did they want her to stay so much? And then she's there. She's not really doing anything to bother them except that she remembers something this other girl said, and now she's this American bitch who needs to go. I'm like, well, then why did you want her here so bad?
The thing, like, this is kind of a mild criticism of this movie. What I would say is that it's light on story. It's not as important as the visuals or the atmosphere that it makes. Like, it's very, very basic. You know what I mean? Girl goes to dance academy. There's something serious going on. It turns out there's witches. There's a couple of deaths. But, like, even the way the movie ends is so abrupt, it almost makes you kind of go, wait, really? You know, like when the credits start rolling as it's burning down. So, like, I don't think the story's bad by any means. I just think it's one of those things where there isn't a lot of thought put into what happened. And because of that, I feel like it kind of adds to the mysterious quality of it. With what you're asking about the maggots, I have no idea because, again, we don't really see the witches' plans going into, like, we don't hear what they are trying to do. It sort of allows you to connect the dots too, because that is, like, for instance, with Susie living off campus, I have no idea why the witches cared if she lived on campus or not.
And then they were drugging her.
Exactly, but we know that that was something that they did because they made her sick so that she would have to stay on campus. So, like, we don't know their motivations entirely. And I think that kind of works because it keeps them mysterious, which makes them scarier because you don't know why they're... And even same thing with, like, some of the... It always seemed to me, like, super petty and small, the things they were murdering people for. Like, the first victim of the movie, it's like, ooh, she found their secret door.
I mean, that's kind of a big thing. She said that she saw their secrets going on back there. She just told them how to get into it.
There you go. But, like, and that one makes sense. But then there's the dog guy where it's like, really? You need to kill him for that? And even at the end of the movie, it's like they're talking about, oh, we should kill that American bitch. It's like, what did she do?
I know.
She has not done anything to harm you guys. If anything, she doesn't know anything until right this second when she's in your little secret base. So it's so funny to me. But I feel like that makes them spookier because you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. But also, as I said, I think part of it is just there wasn't a ton of thought put into the film. I think it kind of relies on its visual storytelling and the atmosphere it builds more than anything to create, like, a mood.
Mm-hmm. It definitely created a mood, but I've never been one where a whole bunch of unanswered questions makes it creepy. Like, for me, that's never worked. To me, that just frustrates me. But I can see how for some people, that heightens the mysterious quality of it.
It's kind of like, so one thing with horror that I kind of believe in is the more, like, if you have a monster, the more you explain the monster, the less scary it is. Like, and you're an Exorcist fan. I would argue that once the second movie came out and you learned that the demon was called Pazuzu, first off, not in the book, I know, like, it was all invented for the sequel, but that's kind of an example of, well, now its name sounds silly, and also now I know that it's the demon of... You know what I mean? It's like when you don't know what the demon's name is, and it's claiming that it's the devil himself, and you don't know if the demon's telling the truth, that's scarier than being like, it's the demon Pazuzu from the 7.5 layer of hell. It relies on or like it hates gluttony, or you know what I mean.
Well, first off, thank you very much for making me have to edit that out. Gosh, as a Catholic, you can't just throw names out there like that. But I get what you mean. It's like once you find out as much you can know about it, it doesn't make it as scary. And I think even Alfred Hitchcock once said, "There's nothing more frightening than an open door." The less you know, that makes it more interesting. I think there's a way to do that without injecting things. I don't know, like I think there's a good way to do that without raising as much, like, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, that Suspiria is Italian for like suspicion or something like that, or suspect or something like that.
Yeah.
Which, and I guess maybe basically all this stuff happens because they made her essentially suspicious. But I don't know, I feel, and I can't even think of a good example right now, but I feel like there's a way to do it without raising a bunch of questions that don't have answers. It's almost like don't raise the questions, let the audience come up with the questions on their own.
And that's kind of what I think they were doing. Because, and a lot of my defenses are also in theory. As much as I love this movie, this is not something I would really think is that scary. I guess at the time it must have been. It's hard to know because I guess no one saw this movie, so I don't know if people were really all that put off by the opening murder outside of like movie critics. But it's one of those things where it, like, at least by today's standards, it's not very scary. So I can't really say, ooh, the witches are scarier because you don't know anything about it. That's like my theory as to why he didn't explain it. Again, it could just be like him and Daria just like got drunk on wine one night eating spaghetti or whatever they do in Italy, and we're like, ooh, let's make this movie about witches at a dance academy. Yeah, we'll shoot it tomorrow. Who knows? But like, my guess is that it's to be more suspicious or mysterious. Another thing I kind of noticed with this is it really drew out like suspenseful moments, like that opening kill. When she's looking out the window, the music is... I was thinking as I watched it, if the music wasn't there, this wouldn't be as suspenseful. Yeah. Because that music is so weird. Like, I was talking about like the opening theme being very like atmospheric and felt like a fairy tale, but there's also like this arrhythmic drumming and just strange noises and stuff, and like for the scenes where people are getting killed off, it's usually using that percussive soundtrack, and it really stresses you out in scenes that would probably be seen as boring. yeah well, this raises really the importance of sound and music in film. Absolutely. And I think, just the same as the visuals, I think the score really elevated this. And what a crazy, actually, fun fact, Goblin also worked on George A. Romero's film Dawn of the Dead, I believe it was. It might have been Night of the Living Dead. But so it's like a German punk band, Goblin. Mm-hmm. And that's like, I think the music and the visuals are the things that people think about with this movie the most. And as I said, I don't know if Romero or Dario Argento discovered Goblin. I'm assuming because they are a German punk band, I'm guessing because they were shooting in Germany, he wanted to work with a German musician or musicians, and he discovered them and was like, wow, you guys sound really weird. I'm doing a movie about witches. You want to do the music? Well, what's interesting... I was going to say that I think that definitely Goblin took some inspiration, though, from the way the Exorcist soundtrack was, because we had the theme of it, which is Tubular Bells, which to me is kind of the Suspiria theme itself is also kind of an homage to that, but also just the weird. That's a good question, T. Which came out first? Because the Exorcist came out in 1973. Okay, so there you go. But I was going to say also just the way the soundtrack is formatted. If you ever listen to the soundtrack, it's really kind of just an amalgamation of just weird music. Like there's this track on there called Wind Song, and it's just odd. And then there's another, I can't even think of what it's called, but there's just a bunch of weird music. And the soundtrack for this film is kind of to me the same way. It all works together cohesively, much like it did in The Exorcist. But when you listen to the standalone pieces by themselves, you're just like,
who came up with this? And so I think there was a little bit of an inspiration. I could be wrong, but I feel like there was some inspiration taken there.
There you go. And you probably are right. I just need a reminder because I knew The Exorcist came out in the 70s, but I was like, was it the early or the late 70s? That always blows my mind, man. The Exorcist came out so...
Well, it's 50
People
years.
really do
it's 50
not
years
listen,
old
like,
this year.
It's crazy, man. Like, a lot of people who watch that movie now and they're like, oh, it's not even scary. The effects are... The early 70s, man, like, Jesus, for the time period it came out, no wonder people were freaking out in the theater. It's crazy, like, the special effects they were using so early. Because, yeah, by today's standards, it looks really fake. But in the time period it came out, that was like... I mean, geez, it predated things like Jaws... Like, God, it's crazy to me how
The Exorcist walked so Jaws could run.
The Exorcist walked so many things could run. It really, like, I'm glad it's still considered a classic, but man,
I mean,
it always blows my mind thinking of it again, just how influential it was.
Really quickly, just while we're on the topic, The Exorcist did turn 50 years old this year.
Which is why they released the best movie in the franchise this year.
You know what? We're gonna pretend like it didn't happen. But
hey,
I had
15 is paying us good money.
Oh my God. I had the very great privilege to sit in on a screening that William Friedkin and Ellen Burstyn did commentary for the film with. And one of my favorite things is, and this is just like classic William Friedkin. Somebody asked some questions about, are the theories about the set being cursed, are those true? And of course William Friedkin's like, of course not, that wasn't a thing. And then Ellen Burstyn just turns to him and goes, the set burned down. It's just, that's all she said to tell him. But to me, that was the funniest thing, because he was just trying to be like, of course not, that's not real. And then she was like, the set burned down, what are you talking about? It was cursed. But that turned 50 years old. I just wanted to share that story.
Heck yeah. So one thing I wanted to, because I've talked about how, like, we both like different things with movies, and I'm really into cinematography. And I've kind of talked about how it's like, I feel like shots should be interesting, or like, should stand out so that you remember them and stuff. And you've said like, oh, if you notice them, then they're, shouldn't you just be like drawn into the story? And I had a new way of thinking about it while I was watching this. For some reason, I came up with this thought. I was thinking about how, like, video games, for instance, and I think part of the reason I came up with this was because, as I said, nothing wrong with the story in this movie, but I would say it's one of those films where the story is very light. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about how it's like a video game can be a good video game with a bad story, or like a light story, like even Mario or something like that. It's not, you're not playing Mario for the gripping narrative that it's weaving. You're playing it because it's fun to play. And I was like, I think that's a better description of why I feel like cinematography is really important, and like thinking of interesting ways to film something, because the same way you can get pleasure out of just playing a game, you can get pleasure out of watching something. And a lot of this movie on paper would be the most boring thing ever. But because of the location and the set design and the cinematography, nothing can be happening, but you're just kind of transfixed by what you're watching. And I feel like this is a great example of a film that does that, because there's a lot of very, as I said, like, just scenes with people dancing or walking around or like doing nothing, no dialogue, but there's camera movement. There's interesting framings of things. One notable shot that I thought was really cool was when she was talking about witches with that psychologist. The second one she talks to, the older gentleman, and the camera pulls in to a reflection of them talking.
Yeah.
So without even cutting, it turns into like a secondary shot. And there's just so much of that in this movie where you're just so transfixed by like what you're watching that you don't even really, it's almost hypnotic. And I feel like that is a good example of kind of what I'm talking about, where it's not so much that the cinematography needs to stand out or like you remember it, but like you get enjoyment from watching something. Yeah. And technically it kind of contradicts the whole Scorsese thing, the dolly from Taxi Driver. And it's just like you said, where it took you out of it. Like, where this, you almost forget that it's happening because you're so transfixed by what you're looking at.
And you know what I liked about that scene is because she's talking to, a professor, somebody who has, the depth of knowledge that you're looking for. And what's interesting is you expect him to like study maybe the lore of witches and that sort of thing, but not necessarily believe in them. And when he starts talking about them as though they're real, when the camera does that flip to the reflection. So it's almost like, is this what he's actually saying, or is this what she's hearing? And I think that's a very amazing use of cinematography to kind of raise that question, because again, we're no longer looking at necessarily reality at that point. We're looking at a reflection.
I agree, and I think that's a perfect example of why they even decided to change the shot.
Yeah.
And as I said, there's like so much of that in this movie. It's not even a long movie, but there's just so much stuff you can really dig at that I'm sure we like forgot to even talk about. But T, what do you think of Exorcist Believer?
Oh my God. I think much like the second Exorcist, we're going to forget that it existed. And as far as I'm concerned, that whole genre, it's The Exorcist and then Legion, which is, they refer to as The Exorcist 3, but it should literally just have been called Legion. The Exorcist and Legion, that's it. All the rest of them don't exist.
Okay, fair enough. But what do you think of Suspiria, 1977?
I really like Suspiria. It was very, it's a very old movie. It's like 47 years old, I think. 46 years old this year. But it was almost like a breath of fresh air as far as what I've seen in the horror genre. It would be really interesting if that sort of, stylization, that interesting, wasn't just relegated to art house films. I'd like to see, more mainstream horror films utilize this kind of, just artistic beauty and, finding beauty in the darkest of subjects and interesting things like that. So I think I would give this 3. And I'm gonna give this 3 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea. And the reason I almost went to a half, but I didn't, just because I think it is a little light on story, but it's incredibly enjoyable. I'll give it a 3.25 out of 4 pitchers of sweet tea. There we go.
I think I'm going to do that too. This is like one of those movies I can recommend to everybody, but it's not exactly super deep or mind blowing as a story. This is a movie that could have been horror trash, but ended up being horror treasure. It's visually stunning. The soundtrack's amazing. It's also kind of nice to listen. Certain tracks, probably not the stressful arrhythmic drumming, but like the do 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 do. Like I bet you could listen to that like in the house or something. Or if you're doing a
listen. I was driving the other day and it was raining, and I had that on.
There you go. You're already got the music from the movie.
Yes.
But yeah, so I would think that Dario. I'm very excited to check out Inferno. I didn't realize it was on Tubi, but I probably will check it out now that I know, because I've been wanting to see more of his stuff. But yeah, it's not a perfect movie, but I definitely recommend it to everybody. I don't think that you need to be into horror movies specifically, and frankly, I don't think that it's really scary enough to bother most people these days. Right, so and 3 out of 4, but really enthusiastic 3 out of 4.
Well, I would say that even though you said it's not a super deep movie, I do feel like it does have a little bit more to say beyond the surface. But
that is true. I just think
it's not like this is an allegory for the suffering of man or something like that.
No, it's very brief. It doesn't waste your time. You're in and out. Literally, the second the story concludes, the credits start rolling. I don't even think I think this is under 90 minutes. It's that fast. So it works as entertainment. It works as art. It's nice and spooky if you want something unique on for Halloween. And it is a very, despite mostly men working on it, I do think it is a very feminine story, a very feminine vibe, and I think
that's one of the reasons why I connected with it so well. Oh, and it is 100 minutes.
Yeah, right. So, what do you guys think? Let us know on our socials. We got a Threads. If you're listening to this on YouTube, we got a comment section. Call us dumb. Tell us that Exorcist Believer is actually the best Exorcist movie. We won't even stop you. You can say whatever kind of deranged stuff you want.
And then if you disagree with Whiskey, stop by his house. It's at no, I'm just kidding.
Right? It's 711 Marsden Avenue, South Dakota.
I was going to do the address from Friends. 11 Yemen Road, Yemen.
There you go. Yeah, if you like this review and this is the first one you've seen or heard, check us out. We've got a whole backlog of things. We got another Halloween episode coming up, but we've got past horror movies you can check out. If horror's not your bag, we got a whole bunch of reviews.
We have a whole back catalog.
This for a little while. But yeah, it's been great hanging with you guys. And until next time, I'm Whiskey.
And I'm Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
Peace out, witches.
Bye, y'all. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.